Alright, so I'm not going to dwell on this too much. I honestly don't want to talk about this show more than I absolutely have to, because I really don't like it. I tried really hard, and I don't have anything against the people who do like it. Don't get me wrong. I don't think it's like a travesty or anything, but I cannot get behind this version of the show. And I want to preface everything else that I'm about to say by saying that I have not finished the show yet. I have not finished season 1 yet. I don't intend to. I have gotten through the Kyoshi Warrior stuff, and that's about it. I kind of skimmed through a couple other areas, but that's all of the coherent show that I've actually seen. I also want to say that there are some things about this show that I like. Like, I like the idea, for example, of giving us more context around the original invasion of the Air Temple and the genocide of the Airbenders. That idea is interesting, like the stuff where we see the political machinations that went into making the genocide possible. That was actually pretty interesting. I also think the actors in this, particularly the kid actors, managed to do a pretty good job with what they're given, and I mean, sometimes that's just not a lot, frankly. Sometimes the dialogue in this is just so on the nose that it's insulting. Like, this is supposed to be the more adult version of the show. I feel insulted being told that, and then these characters stating outright some of the things that these scripts have them state outright. Like, stating outright that Aang is afraid of his power as the Avatar. Like, yeah, the power of the Avatar is the main theme of this version of the show, and so that needed to be addressed at some point, but just saying it outright is really stupid. It tells me that the writers on this had very little faith in their audience. There's also the small matter of the showrunner and several of the actors, too, really emphasizing that the focus of this show was going to be on the power of the Avatar. Which, on paper, sounds good, because the Avatar's power was always something that we were told the characters should be cautious of in the original show, and so putting more emphasis on that would be in line with the themes of the show. But we'll get back to this in a minute. That's really not what they do with it, and I think that's probably the thing that disappoints me the most about this show, frankly, because that actually had me kind of excited. Is where the emphasis of the original show was very much on the anti-colonialist stuff. That's where the focus was, even when the show was doing other things, even when it had other themes. The focus of this show seems to be on might makes right versus might for right, i.e. the fascist ideology of we're powerful so you have to do what we say, versus the anti-fascist mindset of if I have power I should use it to protect the people who don't. And that on paper is fine. In fact, that on paper sounds like a really good premise for a show. It's just, that's not really Avatar. It is, like, that is technically one of the underlying themes of Avatar. The Avatar has power, he should use it to help people when he can. Like, we saw multiple perspectives of multiple past Avatars over the course of the show, and some of them didn't use their power when they should have, and people died, and some of them misused their power and caused more problems for other people. There was a nuance to it, illustrating that dichotomy of might makes right versus might for right. And some of the changes that I objectively don't like, I can see where they were going with them in terms of this refocusing of the show. Like removing Sokka's sexism arc. Like, I hate it. I hate that they do that, because I think that's an important part of what makes his character interesting. But replacing it with an arc where he has to realize that his strength is actually enough to make a difference, when that's something that he's questioning, makes sense for this version of the story, as he has to learn that his might can be used to protect people. Because the real reason for Sokka's sexism in the original series was that by dismantling his own gender essentialism, he would learn how to dismantle examples of the Fire Nation's race essentialism when he encountered it. And by extension, the audience would too. In a version of the story where the emphasis has shifted from putting the anti-colonialist stuff first to putting the might for right stuff first, that can work. The problem is they don't really do it very well. Like, they seem to have had an idea of what they wanted to do, but they didn't really take enough passes at it to actually make it good, and end up reinforcing some of the same gender stereotypes that the original subverted, while making this additional point. And that's bad. That is a bad thing to do. And frankly, I don't want to spend enough time on this video to get into the specifics of that. If you want to know the specifics of that, I would recommend checking out Jessie Gender's video on the show. She talks about this exact aspect early on in that video and does a fantastic job of it. In fact, she talks about some of the exact same stuff I'm about to talk about in a minute and probably does a better job of it than I do. So, you know, maybe just switch to that video in general at this point, frankly. Moving right along. I also really question why it was necessary to see the genocide of the Airbenders. Like, the showrunner was quoted saying that he really wanted to see the genocide of the Airbenders. That was something he was looking forward to putting in his show. And not only is that kind of a shitty perspective to have, I think, because frankly, we do not need to see the Fire Nation's initial attack to understand the horror of it. The animation does a fantastic job of showing that just from the aftermath. But again, they could have done something with this that worked within the themes of this revived show and helped to reinforce them in a positive way. They could have used the scene where the Airbenders were fighting back against the Fire Nation who had come to genocide them to showcase how essential the might for right struggle is, even in the face of a situation where you don't stand a chance. They could have put a big emphasis on Airbenders trying to escape the temple, for example, and you have some of the same heroic stands that the other Airbenders make in the actual version of the show happen, but in the context of them trying to buy time for others in a very hopeless situation, which isn't exactly not what they were doing, don't get me wrong, but like, emphasize that more. Focus on it more. Focus on the tragedy of this situation and the heroic defiance that occurs in the face of that tragedy. If you really want it to feel like a tragedy, maybe even have the plan to allow most of the Airbenders to escape almost work before the rug is pulled out from under them. That is certainly a thing that they could have done, because the production on this show is actually pretty solid for the most part. Appa kind of looks terrible in a lot of shots, but that's beside the point. You could have easily, just by reframing a lot of these shots and emphasizing different shots, reconfigured this entire scene to fit better within the themes of this revised show. But instead, they just fight it like a Marvel movie action sequence, focusing, emphasizing the cool visuals and superpowers. It really ends up coming across like their priority in showing the genocide of a people was that they thought it would look cool. And this happens again when we see Aang react to the sight of Gyatso's body and enter the Avatar state, in a scene which in the animation was terrifying. He looked like a frickin' horror monster in that scene. This almost faceless thing that the characters can't even approach without being knocked on their butts. In a way, his anger and his grief consuming him is perpetuating the same kind of destruction that led him to this point in the first place. And it's shot like that. It is shot to evoke that. I say shot, it's framed, it is directed to evoke that. But in the live action, they just shoot it like he's going Super Saiyan. It looks like he's going Super Saiyan. I understand them wanting it to look good, don't get me wrong. But did they think that Aang going into the Avatar state couldn't look visually impressive unless he looked cool and not intimidating? Because I very much disagree. That is one of the most visually impressive shots of the entire first season of the animated version, and he's freaking terrifying in it. And we get the line afterwards that when everything is taken away from you, that's when you learn whether or not you can fight, or something along those lines. Katara says it. And while that is a pretty good line, and it fits within the themes of might makes right versus might for right, saying that in your lowest point, you are capable of finding strength to stand up for people who might be in the situation you're in and prevent them the same pain that you face. But in that context, it's even more important to see Aang's power as a dangerous thing to start with, a thing that he needs to learn how to control, because the implication should be that if he takes it too far, if he goes too far in the use of that power, he will just perpetuate the same cycle that he is trying to break, and that therefore mindfulness and caution and a remembrance of your real goals and priorities should be the priority, for lack of a better term. I really should start scripting these better. It's so frustrating, and couple that with the fact that the show starts off with Aang's backstory, telling us immediately that the writers on this version did not understand the point of putting Aang and Zuko's backstories in parallel flashbacks, which was a major aspect of the show, showing their parallel importance and development as characters. Between all of that, I was so put off this show that I just couldn't do it anymore. And then I go and I start watching other scenes that other people have been talking about, and like, my god, what did they do to Boomy, man? Like, my god, they understood him worse than they understood the entire rest of the show put together. To the point of it being, like, insulting to his fans. Straight up. I also find this version of Iroh to be incredibly uncompelling. Though, Zuko is pretty interesting. I do like what I've seen so far of Zuko's story, but not enough to make me want to watch the rest of the show. And I think the reason that I'm so frustrated by this, that I am so passionate about this, without even having finished watching it yet, assuming that I ever do, is simply because with a couple more passes over the scripts, and a little bit more thought into the themes, and I feel like this version of Avatar could have been really powerful, in a different way than the original, but still in a way that mattered. And as is, it just fails at being that. It looks good, and like, I'm not one who thinks that something shouldn't be adapted into live action, even if the other version of it is effectively perfect already. Because especially in the context of something that has like martial arts and stuff in it, it's cool seeing people doing superhero fantasy martial arts in quote-unquote real life. There is a certain fun factor to that, and at the end of the day, entertainment is supposed to be fun, along with everything else. So, like, if you're somebody who doesn't particularly care about the themes of this version, you've already seen the original, you've already absorbed the themes of that show, and you really just want to go into this to watch and experience cool fantasy martial arts stuff, this will probably actually do it for you. The fight scenes in this look pretty great. It's just, man, Avatar is already so freaking good. It's so good. And this, at its best, is only like, kind of as good. Overall, it really only kind of averages out to being, like, mediocre. It's disappointing on virtually every level. And it gets almost worse when you see a scene of the gang palling around, and it feels like any humor was just, like, taped on top to make the scene feel more like an Avatar scene. Or when you see these kid actors who, talented as they may be, are not professional level yet. They're not, like, experienced professionals yet. When you see them having to deliver some of the worst exposition I've ever heard in my life. Like, this one, man, more so than most other adaptations that I've seen, we just did not need this. It was not necessary. And anyone who watches this without watching the original is doing themselves a massive disservice. I really don't know what else to say other than that. It could have been something, and it just isn't. The barest skeleton, the idea of something is here, but it never passes that threshold. I really genuinely hope that this one gets shut down before it can move forward. The resources going to this show could be going to much better things. And yet, when I squint, I can see why others would like this. If you really are here just to see cool live-action versions of some of the stuff that you saw in the original, I can see why you would like this. If you're someone who also sees the ideas of the themes that this show seems to be going for, and you're able to look past the fact that they're not really well realized, and still get something out of them, I can see why you would like this. So while I am very much against this show, I am kind of curious to hear what other people think of it. So I guess let me know what you think of it. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? Has what I have said today made you want to curse me and all of my descendants? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, you might as well like the video, share it with anyone else who think would enjoy my content, subscribe if you haven't. You should also check out the description of the video where I have links to my social medias as well as to where you can pick up the first 3 novels in my book series, all of which are available for sale. Either way though, this has been AJ22 and I will talk to you guys later, just not about this show.